The things I'm going to say in this video are very painful for me to admit, but I think they're incredibly important. You see, I've never been a particularly religious person. In fact, I'm not religious at all. I consider myself a man of science, and it's always been hard for me to kind of reconcile science with religion when clearly there are stories in religion that don't jive with the science, right? When there's, people doing miracles and walking on water, and there's a history of the world that the timeline doesn't make sense with science, et cetera, et cetera. It's always been a hard kind of contradiction for me, and for that reason, I never really could get into the whole religion thing. However, as a rational person of the world, it's inescapable that people who are religious seem to do better in life in a lot of ways than people who are not. People who are religious tend to, by virtue probably of attending, churches and synagogues and things like that, tend to have better and deeper friendships and better emotional connections in a lot of ways than people who are not religious. I don't know this for a fact, but I would bet money that people who are religious stay in marriages more often than people who are not religious. People who are religious live longer than people who are not. That's kind of important. People who are religious tend to have less stress than people who don't have religion in their lives. Again, kind of important. People who are religious tend to be more successful on average than people who are not religious across the board. So there's a lot of real strong benefits apparently to religion. But at the same time, I still can't get on board with it because I'm a person of science and I can't quote unquote lie to myself. And I know me saying that to someone who's religious, they're going to be offended that I said lie to myself. But the point is, I can't make myself believe something that I can't rationalize to myself. Okay, I can't quote unquote, again, bad word to use, but can't quote unquote brainwash myself into being religious just because I think it would work better for me or just for a utilitarian reason. It doesn't really work that way. But I can still recognize very much that there are a lot of positive aspects for it. And I want to kind of reconcile this difference for you and give you a way forward if you are atheist or agnostic, such as myself, that you can hopefully gain a lot of these benefits of religion, even if you don't fully get on board with it or even if you don't become a believer. The answer to this kind of puzzle comes from one of the very reasons why I originally rejected religion in the first place, which is the idea of evolution. When I was taught the idea of evolution, that idea to me was so beautiful and so rational and so sound, and it made so much of the world make sense that if evolution makes sense and is so good, how can you rationalize that with something like creationism, right? Which is the religious concept. And so I could never really get on board with that. However, the interesting thing to think about when you look at the world of religion is understand this. Religions evolved too. Throughout human history, there were probably millions upon millions of different religions. The ones that you see today are the very few that were the fittest and that survived through eons. That's a pretty strong statement. That's a pretty strong accomplishment of modern current religions. They're clearly doing something right. Look at the major religions of the world and look at what they teach. And not necessarily, the stories of what they teach, but look at the lessons of the stories. Look at the derivations. And then, even further, look at the commonalities across the religions. So if you see a certain principle that exists in Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Buddhism, all four, and maybe add in Taoism, Confucianism, add in whatever you want. But the more places it exists in religions that have survived and thrived, the more likely it is that that's a positive and good behavior, and more likely it is that you should think about incorporating that sort of behavior into your own life. While you may not become religious, you may not be a believer, you should definitely study religions. You should study the doctrines of religions and study them through the lens of why did this work? And there's some great examples of this. And some of them make sense and some of them don't nowadays. There was one lesson that I learned in high school history class, which really captivated me and I thought was really profound. I'm glad my teacher taught me it. He basically looked at how a lot of religions have a ban on eating pork, right? A lot of the earlier religions have that, and even religions that have survived to this day have that ban. And the question he asked is, why did that exist from a historical perspective? And the fact of the matter was that of the animals that were eaten as food, pork tended to eat a dirtier diet, less clean food than a lot of other animals, and therefore tended to be more infected by disease, and therefore tended to more often end up having bad meat or meat that if you ate it, you could do yourself harm by eating it. Refraining from eating pork actually helped the people who were in that religious doctrine, religious practice, to survive better than others. And so it became a self-perpetuating, self-fulfilling doctrine because the people who followed it passed their genes along more, had offspring, and taught those offspring this custom. Now that's one example that may or may not have a lot of utility today, but things like being good to your neighbor and things like developing strong bonds and things like understanding the balance between justice and mercy in how you're living your life, a lot of those tenets of religion are obviously beneficial to this day, and it's no surprise that the people that follow those sorts of religious tenets do very, very well. One thing that's going to be very consistent across all of these religious doctrines is the idea of a community. And this makes sense for the religion in the sense of keeping the religion together, having it spread, having the ideas shared. Obviously, that's going to help, the religion to sustain itself. But the other thing it does is it massively helps the people who practice it. When things went wrong, and in ancient history, things went wrong a lot, having a support system that you could count on because you had this mutual bond where, you have a drought, some other farmer will take care of you this year, and then next year when they have a drought, you take care of them, right? That sort of a thing, that sort of a support network and that sort of a group sharing the burden and having each other's backs is absolutely critical. So set something like that up. Set up a community, whether it's community of shared values and morals, which is probably a very, very good way to go, or even just a community of shared interests where you're pulling for each other and you care about each other and you've got each other's back. So am I going to tell you should brainwash yourself and make yourself religious if you don't believe? No, I'm not, because one, it's not what I've done, and two, I don't think it would work because you'd know on a deep level that you are just trying to sort of lie to yourself or convince yourself of something you don't actually believe. What I am suggesting, though, is study the principles of religion, study the behaviors that are created by those principles, and adopt the ones that are most useful so that you can have a lot of these things that religious people have that help them to be so successful in life, whether or not you are, in fact, religious. One final one I'm going to add, and this may be one of the hardest ones to get without being religious, but it's very important, is believing in something beyond yourself. Right? Having something to live for, having a purpose to live for. There was a very interesting book by a man named Viktor Frankl. It's called Man's Search for Meaning. And in this book, he looked at people in concentration camps, and he looked at the people who survived and the people who didn't survive. And the biggest factor he found in survival was having something to live for beyond themselves. And for some people, it was religion. For other people, it was like a family member or wanting to get back to a particular cause or mission or something, right? So people that just wanted to stay alive for the sake of staying alive didn't tend to. But people who tried to stay alive to get back to their family or tried to stay alive to find their child and protect them and something like that, or who believed in a higher power and found a meaning and a purpose there, those were the people that did the best. So one of the key things that you can do, religion or no, is find a purpose, find a meaning, find a cause, find something you believe in and care about in your life beyond just your day-to-day. So that's one final takeaway I'll give you. But the big takeaway is this. Whether or not you're religious, and again, I'm not, there is a lot to be learned and a lot to be respected in religion and religious people. So do learn from them and do use that learning to enhance your life.